All right, guys, welcome to Borrow from the Best. Today, Laurel, in a few sentences, would you tell us who you are and what you do before we get started?
Of course. My name is Laurel Farrer, and I am a remote work expert. So, what that means is that I am the CEO and founder of the world's foremost consulting firm that specializes exclusively in remote work, which is Distribute. But then I'm also the founder of the Remote Work Association and just general advocate for virtual organizational development.
Yes. And I like to point out you were doing this before it became really cool, or at least like really needed.
Yes, I'm not one of those people that changed my LinkedIn profile in 2020 and I was like, ta-da, I'm a remote work. Yeah, no, I've been doing this for 15 years as a COO, managing both HR and operations. And obviously, most recently, the trend is people operations because it blends both worlds. So yes, I did this for over a decade in the corporate world and then now consult full-time.
Yes, so good. And our goal today for whoever's listening, right? I always say this could be a founder of a company, this could be an individual leader, there could be even employees who are listening today who are just curious about what are some of the ideas, the mindsets, the practices that we can borrow from the best on when it comes to this remote work environment. And I'm passionate about this because I feel like we have some unlearning to do after last year.
Oh,
It's my
yes.
assumption. So I'm coming in with that assumption. I'm going to share my bias like really early on. But I kind of thought, Laura, that would be a good rhythm for us is to really, I do this with my clients a lot. Let's simplify this big, huge topic that makes us all sweat and itch and say, just briefly, let's reflect where we've been, ground where we are, and then really just thoughtfully think because of all that, where are we headed? So we'll use that format today. So
Love
knowing
it.
that we're trying to sort of analyze this remote work of 2020, give us your take. Give us your take on what happened in the pandemic with quote unquote remote work.
Yeah, it was such a fascinating year because my entire Q3 and Q4 of 2019 was spent traveling to a bunch of different organizations and thought leaders and governments saying, hey, this is going to be a big year for remote work. All of the statistical trends were showing a high level of growth in 2020. So we knew that it was going to be a big year. Obviously, we did not know how big of a year. So, we thought there would probably be a peak increase of a couple of percentages, maybe, 2 or 3 or 4 percentage points, which would still be huge. But what ended up happening was a growth of over 60 points. So it was it was a really big year. But I think it's really important to understand, though, that what we were projecting for was that organic rate of remote work in the traditional sense. What happened was not the organic growth of remote work. It was the organic growth of remote work as a contingency plan. And so what we saw happen and what all of us have been experiencing for the past year is not remote work as usual. This is not virtual organizational behavior. This is workplace flexibility as an emergency response. And so this is not ideal circumstances at all. So that's really where we've been, is people thinking, oh, okay, we've done this now and we're remote friendly now and check, here we are. But no, that was just implementing it as a contingency plan. Now there's a whole new level of work to do in order to think about this sustainably and in terms of virtual operations, not just workplace flexibility.
Yeah. And, I was reflecting back, watching very early on some of my organizations. And although my primary business isn't remote work, I've led remote teams. I look at organizational performance. So that's part of it, like the structure, the foundation. So I played in that space enough that when I started looking around at what people were doing, which is like they lifted and shifted,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
They copy and pasted what they were doing. They were 9 hours of meetings in person before. Now they're in 9 hours of Zoom meetings.
Yeah.
We just took everything online instead of really putting it through some type of filter. So I was like, gosh, this is so sloppy. And I thought, oh, that's a really offensive word. And it was, but what it did is it told me like, we're getting scrappy. I wanted to give credit. It's not sloppy, it's scrappy. Like we had to think very quickly. And in an area, Laurel, where we had sort of rejected, we had our own theories that this was never going to work for us.
Yes.
So it was, I get why it was scrappy, but I love what you say about moving towards sustainability. So if we had to look back on some of these maybe behaviors or mindsets that we've developed in, I think you said, you said contingency. I will say crisis remote, right? Like, what did we do maybe that we should be paying attention to? What habits did we develop last year that we might want to pause on?
That's a great question. Primarily what we've done as just a contingency plan is that we have enabled workplace flexibility. So we have changed where our people are. And that's a great start. And it really does need to be applauded. I mean, remote work as an industry, as a conversation is so small and so young. I mean, yes, it's been happening for a half of a century by now, but as an industry trend, there's not like all these books and courses and resources on this. Like it was, me and like 20 other people throughout the world being like, yes, this is possible, like waving our little flag, begging to be heard. So yeah, it's not a big deal. So there wasn't a path, there wasn't a template to say, okay, this is what to do. So we do need to applaud and celebrate how great the world has done in its resourcefulness, but to also recognize that's just a workplace change. Now what's next is a operational change. We need to think about how we are operating as a distributed team and how that ripple effects into other parts of the organization, like culture and workforce training and digital tools and management methods and reporting infrastructures, and the list goes on and on and on to digital resources and more. Like, we need to be thinking about this much more broadly about how do we operate in a way that enables location irrelevancy, not just where are you, but really removing the conversation about where are you and enabling you to be productive wherever you are, so that we can really fulfill that mantra of the remote work world, which is work is something that we do, not somewhere that we go. And so we want to really empower people regardless of location so that their performance is equal, whether they are in the office or offsite.
Yeah. I love the term location irrelevancy, right? Like that's what we're talking about, this return to the office. It just needs to be rethinking work as a whole, and I know there's a lot of logistics and we'll get into that, but we gave some of the credit. What are some of the things that you saw that companies or leaders did really well while we were scrappy last year?
The factors that we always look for in clients that we work with that tells us that they can continue to be strong and in a conversation about sustainability is their willingness and ability to communicate. So companies that communicated very, very effectively and transparently all along the way, that is a really strong sign of success to us, because that means that their people feel informed, that they are not feeling as isolated as they could have, right? We all are feeling isolated this year because we've been socially disconnected, but in a traditional and normal circumstance of remote work, the isolation that we're at risk for is not as much social, it's more informational. That we don't necessarily miss sitting next to somebody, we miss having access to somebody, because at work, people are a resource that enable us to do our job better. And so the more that we can keep everybody in the loop and provide resources like digital handbooks and memos and asynchronous all hands videos and things like that, like the more that we can just communicate to help people understand, we see you, we hear you, we want you to feel as comfortable and engaged as possible. That really is what sets them up for success. And so if we haven't been doing that as an organization, it's not too late. We can start doing that, but really just create communication channels, both input and output, as much as possible, because there's so much that happens in an office that we observe. We learn so much through observation, just seeing who's working on a project together and what's going on and how's that person feeling. Like, we just see so much. And so we have to replace that communication channel with other communication channels. And that's where those asynchronous formats come into play.
Oh, I think that's great. And kudos to the companies who were transparent and displayed vulnerability to said, like, we have no idea
all
what
the
we're
answers.
doing.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for many organizations, Laurel, that was the first time they've ever taken that humble, I would say humble step, but it's not a norm. I know it's not a norm in corporations to say to all your people, like, we have no idea what we're doing.
And many of them still haven't.
Yes,
But it's not too late to start.
it is.
And especially to keep the communication going. Most companies did conduct some type of survey in Q2, Q3 of 2020 of like, hey, how is this working for you? What do you need? Most did that, but really haven't done anything since then. So we need to make sure that the communication is continuous, that it's not just part of the contingency plan, but we're always asking how their experience is evolving, what's going well, what's not going well, because the remote work experience that people are having now in Q2 of 2021 is very different than a year ago. And they have very different opinions about it, for better or for worse. And so we need to keep those channels flowing.
Yes, we have to ask and then we have to act, not on everything, right? I was onboarding a new client recently, and they were sort of saying, we also surveyed last year, and I was waiting. I'm like, wait for the action. And it didn't really come. And they say, we almost feel like we shouldn't have asked. And I was like, well, in that circumstance, if you weren't willing to act, but to your point, Laurel, it's not too late. Let's go back and say, look, we've taken too long to act on the survey advice. We appreciate your honesty. These are the things that we think we can get to. We don't have the time or energy to get to all of them. And by the way, one of my keys, Laurel, is make them part of the solution. Create work teams, like give them a percentage of their time, 10%, go Google and do 20%, but like work on really creating change and let them own some of it.
Absolutely. And that's only going to make the change management process that much more efficient, because you've got grassroots change agents that are going to be representing this change and answering questions in every single department. So it's only going to make your process easier and really help that talent retention along the way. So it's a win-win. And there's not any excuse not to be having communication with our team members.
Agree. And, it's as simple as communicating. I know that's not easy, but you have internal people that could probably help you do that better or differently than you have been doing. Maybe you haven't tapped into them, or you need to seek some help, right? Yeah. From a professional who can say, like, this is the way that you should be doing based on who you are as an organization, right? Really.
Absolutely. And especially in this conversation, I mean, you just don't know what you don't know, right? And especially as we're thinking about remote work in terms of sustainability, like, yeah, there's some information out there and there's some examples to follow in terms of converting to that workplace change, but do you really understand what pain points are going to pop up in 10 years from the decisions that you're making now?
Yeah.
Probably not. So it was really, really helpful to swallow that piece of humble pie and say, hey, look, I don't have all of the answers here. So I'm going to ask somebody that has been down this road before and help them help me. And I'm going to allow them to advise me, and I'm going to listen to what they have to say and help them customize their knowledge and experience for our unique organization.
Oh, so agree, Laurel. I think that's great. So we've done some reflection on where we've been, right? Scrappy. Now we want to get sustainable, but I also want to be realistic when we look at the now, right? Because I tend to be a big dreamer, right? Two of my top strengths are strategic thinking and futuristic. So I've learned over the years, like maybe I've already can envision where the company is, but I've got to bag all the way out to where they really are now. And I can't pull too quickly, much like a butterfly pulling them out of the cocoon. They're not going to make it. They got to go at their own pace. So as much as I want every company to stop and do a complete overhaul of their structures and their processes and their people alignment and their tools, I don't want to push too hard for everyone to take the equivalent of like a worldwide trek to find themselves, right? I know that's not realistic. So let's get realistic about what they should be thinking about now, right? We don't want to bite off more than we can chew. If I'm a company owner or member of an executive team, what should we be thinking about right now?
Well, the best kept secret about remote work is that it's still just work. So we don't really need to reinvent the wheel here and completely build a new digital infrastructure, or operational processes have to be completely renovated. It's not like that. It can be like that in extreme circumstances, but that is really unrealistic and could be very detrimental if you dive in too quickly without knowing how to swim, right? So we definitely want to help people baby step their way into this and say, look, the benefits of remote work are higher productivity, higher output, higher talent retention. Everybody wants that, but it's not necessarily because people are working remotely. It's just because we've been forced to adopt some strategies of work that we have been looking at for a long time and have been beta tested in many, many different circumstances in the business world, but we were just forced to adopt them at scale because we didn't have the traditional in-office processes that worked for us. So things like results-based tracking and measurement of productivity, like we can't see people working, so we don't have monitoring options. We had to rely on that results-based tracking. And so that's how it works. Like we knew that from the business world, that was a more effective and more accurate measurement of productivity, but people were hesitant to actually deploy. We in virtual organizations had to. So it's more of just considering it a way of incubating the way that we know that we should be working anyway, regardless of location. So that's really where the conversation can start, is what are our pain points as an organization outside of location? Let's not even think about where our people are. Like, what are our pain points? What are we trying to solve? Is it efficiency? Is it talent retention? Is it culture development? And, like, what is it? Is it engagement? Like, what are we trying to solve? And then thinking of solutions of how can we do that better in, again, that location irrelevant way? Like, how can we do that better no matter where our people are? So that if somebody's traveling to a client's office, or somebody's sitting at the front desk at HQ, or somebody's working from home that day, they're still going to have the same experience. So we really just want people to start thinking in that way. Stop thinking about location and just start thinking about, like, what's best for my team, and putting people first before processes. So the more that we can do that, the more that it becomes easier to write a remote work policy. And that's a really great place to start, because again, it's that communication. Like, okay, what changes? This is literally a record of our commitment to work in a different way. So how do your performance expectations change? How do my performance expectations change? What tools are we going to be using? How are you going to stay connected to our team due to your self-management? What are we as an organization going to do to ensure that you can stay connected and engaged to your team? It's a mutual agreement to the terms that enable that location irrelevancy and allow you to work in a different way.
Yes. And, you asked one of my favorite questions, what could we be doing better or differently? I said, listen, if there's one question, if you only had one question that you could repeat on end, like on a loop as a leader, it would be that one. What can I do better or differently? What can we do better or differently? What can I do better or differently for you, the team, right? So we need to be asking that. And the key to that question, and what you just said, Laurel, about the agreement, is that this is a time to reposition true partnership between the ecosystem and their people. That has not existed in the majority of companies, in my view, right? I've worked 19 years in-house, 5 years outside. It just doesn't exist, right? I know the grass is not greener, it's a different color, and there's always dog poop in the yard, but so I'm not expecting perfection, but I am expecting progress. So what I'm taking away from what you just shared, Laurel, is like, okay, Anna, this is not a like become a different person, trek around the world. They need to really incubate, decide on the pain points, prioritize their action items, and I'm hoping this is what I heard, then get their people involved in making these agreements with what is shifting. And by the way, what's not, because I think we need some of that stability right now.
Absolutely. But we also have to very empathetically recognize that this is a really hard time for people to do that. Like always in the world of business, we're pushing for progress and innovation and development, right? Like that has never changed since the beginning of business. However, what has changed is we are tired. It has been an entire year of stress and recalibrating and reorganizing and, contingency plan after contingency plan after contingency plan. And we're just exhausted. So much of our professional and personal psychologies right now are just craving stability and normalcy, something that we don't have to figure out, something else that we can just go to work and it will be boring and it will be wonderful and we don't have to figure anything out. So we're all craving that in such a deep way. So this timing of asking people to push themselves a little bit further and to continue on that path of instability and insecurity and innovation and risk, it is a big ask right now. It's always a big ask, but specifically due to the timing and how we're all feeling as a society and a global community, it's an even bigger ask.
Agree. And I think we're getting into this, like, we're going to start making recommendations here, Laurel, on what we should be thinking about next. Like we're talking about stability now, but when I was hearing you talk earlier about access to information, and we're talking about stability and, you know, the psyche and this humanity issue, all of those things, access, humanity in the workplace creates belonging, and belonging increases the chance that diversity is actually going to stick. Diversity of thought, diversity of humans, diversity of innovation and impact inside our organization. So this is so interconnected. So I guess I want to just reassure companies that this ROI, although you can't maybe point to it right away, is going to be so huge from a longevity standpoint.
Yes, absolutely. I think that remote work and the habits and processes that it forces us into, like we talked about before, it really is one of the most underutilized strategies of the business world, because it does push us into doing business in a way that we know we should have been doing for decades, but we just were comfortable in our habits and in our traditions. And so it really pushes us into those realms that have incredible corporate benefits, incredible socioeconomic benefits, and incredible personal benefits too, if we do it the right way. If we're just doing a workplace change, we're not going to see any of those benefits. But if we're willing to increase the human element in a digital conversation and collaboration, that is where we see the magic happen. And we're working with more empathy, and we're working with more efficiency, and we're working with more strategy and individual respect for who we are as our whole selves, not just our professional selves. So yeah, if we're willing to think about this intentionally and really carefully implement tried and true strategies of adoption and optimization, we can unlock incredible rewards.
Yeah, I get a little choked up, but honestly, I do, because I mean, look, I was raised by hippies. My whole purpose is to restore humanity into our work and our workplaces. So like, as you're telling the story, I can so clearly see what this will do for people's personhood. And then our sense of community inside our organizations, which goes toward the sense of community in our nations and in our globes. Like this is so big. I mean, I hate to like give it too much credit, and I'm not saying remote work is the answer to humanity, but it
kind of is.
Like
I'm willing to claim that.
Yeah, let's do it. Remote work is the solution.
It's a solution to all. But I mean, we do work with the United Nations and the World Economic Forum because of this. I mean, of the 17 United Nations and platforms, right? Their goals, remote work, either directly or indirectly, fulfills 14 of them. Like this has such incredible power that goes way beyond the ability to not have to sit in a cubicle all day. Like this increases people's ability to live healthier lifestyles, to have stronger relationships with their families, to have more environmental sustainability. Like there is so much power to unlock here, but we do have to be intentional and we do have to be strategic. So we've got to think about responsibly, not just default to whatever feels convenient, right? Like letting people go back into the office and like, okay, whoever wants to go back, that's fine. Or if you want to work remotely, cool, whatever, we don't care. Like the less we care about it, the less passion we feel about the changes that we need to implement now, the less impact it will have on our world at scale. So the more that we care about how this impacts our people and our organization, the more that it will ripple effect into global impact.
Oh my gosh, so many ideas we can borrow from the best here. I'm getting so stoked. So I'm gonna push into two things I've heard you say so far that I think are moving us towards like, what should we be thinking about next? The first one was the timing, right? And we were talking about like, it's such an overwhelming time for the psyche and in the world, et cetera. I always look at two things that I think we have to assess before we really know what we should change. And it's capacity and capabilities. We can't get to capabilities until we address capacity, because it clouds our thinking. It makes our work, when we are pushed too much, makes our work messy and not as impactful. So talk to me about capacity and maybe what you're seeing from a best practice perspective. I threw that idea out earlier of like carving out 10% or 20% of their time. Is that a realistic expectation or a different best practice?
Absolutely. So often people make the mistake of like, oh, I want somebody else to worry about this. And so they hire a head of remote or a consultant, which is fine. That's I mean, obviously I'm a consultant. I do advocate for that, but we also
like,
yeah, but I'm not there to do the job for them. I'm there to help them understand what their role needs to be in the change, because this is not about somebody integrating into the executive team and being a representative. This is about all of us changing the way that we think, the way that we work, the way that we think about how we are accessible and available to each other and to our markets. So we really need to take ownership of the conversation and understand how this is going to impact every single role in the company. And so the more, again, there's that word communication, but the more that we can communicate as a team to say, okay, how is this going to impact my role? And how is this going to impact my team's roles? And how is this going to impact our department? And is there anything that we need to change in this workflow? The more that this change will be sustainable, as opposed to just waiting for it to happen to us.
Yeah. Are there some things we could point to, Laurel, that, for example, creating work teams or a governance structure or something that could help them figure out how not to just count on a head of remote, but really ingrain this and make it all of our jobs?
Yeah. We offer a few services. One is what we call a virtual health analysis that helps a company understand exactly where they are in the change management process, because the big risk of remote work adoption is that you just don't know what you don't know, right? Like, this is such a young industry that there's not all of these big checklists and books and programs and that educate you all along the way. And so it's like, well, we've done this much. Is that enough? Like, is that a little? Is that a lot? I don't know. So we help people identify where they are on the road that helps them have more confidence in not only what they've done, but what they have yet to do, even if it's nothing. So that's one way of just like validating the work that you've done and identifying, giving yourself that peace of mind and that knowledge of what's next, or is there more to do, or am I putting myself at risk for something that I don't know about? So just getting that confidence and that second opinion helps create such a large peace of mind. But then in addition to that, we also recommend that remote work policy for everybody. Most people, when they think of a remote work policy, they're just thinking, okay, I agree to be able to work off site, sign here, done. And it's like this 2-sentence document and it's completely worthless.
And you can take it away from me at any time, right? That's
exactly.
How
yeah.
went, right?
Sign. Yeah. Yeah, that is not a valuable agreement for anybody. So really extending that remote work policy is not only a great agreement for compliance and for setting expectations between you and your team, but it's also a really great checklist for you and your team to go through each of those conversations that need to be had. So you're going through that conversation of saying, okay, now we need to agree to the terms of, are people going to be allowed to live in different states or in different countries or not? We need to be able to communicate that. So we need to have a conversation about it first. And then, the next one is, are we going to provide equipment and pay for their internet, or are they, or whatever? Like, all of those conversations should be in, and all of those terms should be in the remote work policy. So having a consultant or an expert guide you through the remote work policy drafting process can help make sure that you have access to somebody who knows best practices, who knows pros and cons through that whole thing. And you write that draft with them while an expert is sitting next to you, and then you can take it away and implement and be do-it-yourself version after that.
Yeah. Oh, those are great tips. I think the expanding our remote work policy, or writing one if you don't have one,
right,
is going to be really important.
Very important.
Yes. Do you feel like it's realistic from I would say talent market, because I'm actually predicting and hoping that we are moving into a talent market where the employees, where the talent has more control, and they're actually going to be the ones that are going to create this change internally, because they're going to demand it.
Yeah.
Right. So these organizations who are saying like, nope, everybody back in the office, I'm worried about the longevity there.
Absolutely. And the data is absolutely backing that up. So, I mean, irrelevant to remote work, we know that we're moving into a talent market like post pandemic, and all of
Yeah.
the statistics that are in the HR world right now are all saying the same thing, like buckle up. 2021 is going to be a massive year of transition and rotation. So regardless of a conversation about virtual jobs, we already know that that's going to happen. Then when we add the layer into that of remote work, that's where it starts to get really sticky, because we have had statistics for ages that say between 70 and 90% of workers want remote work as their number one employment benefit. But prior to 2020, it wasn't very realistic to expect or to demand that. Now it is. Now, at least 40% of jobs will continue to have flexibility post-pandemic here in the United States. That's an astronomical number. Prior to 2020, it was 3%. So it's a really, really massive climb. And so people now have enough demand and market viability to be able to have that negotiation power to say, look, if you're not going to offer me flexibility and you're going to force me to go back into the office, I'm going to go somewhere else that will let me to. So yeah, it is going to be an incredible shift and migration over the next couple of years.
Yeah, this is very similar. I mean, a personal example for me, when I was being recruited by companies in my 19 years, at the time, one of my first questions was like, tell me about your benefits for same-sex couples.
Yep.
And I am not a same-sex couple. I was married to a man, but that was an indicator for me about how progressive that they were and how much they were thinking about the humans that worked for them versus just their interests. And so I think this is going to be like the new version of us asking that, where we're seeking. That decision alone tells me a lot about your values and your culture. So you don't even need to tell me your stories about what they are. Just tell me what your decision is there. And I think it's going to be pretty predictive for some.
Yeah. And we're even having conversations in the remote work world of, wow, it used to be our employment perk, our benefit to offer remote work. That used to be the, cherry on top that attracted the best talent. That's not enough anymore. No. So not only are these employers that are digging in their heels and not allowing workplace flexibility, not only are they in competition with companies that are just allowing remote work, but they're also in competition with the companies that are starting to think about virtual culture in a very, very deep and profound way. So we're thinking not just, are you allowed to work from home, but how are we going to enhance that experience as much as possible and offer recognition programs and rewards and benefits that are specifically for work from home, like sending cleaning companies to your home and sending meal delivery services and offering childcare stipends and home office stipends. Like that's only going to keep increasing as well. So the competition is going to get quite fierce on a diversity of levels.
Oh, I agree. So that's an example where it's not enough to provide just the remote, like, okay, you can work remote because that's scrappy. We're looking for the sustainability of that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We're starting to innovate and evolve and develop even within that workplace flexibility model, because remote work isn't one size fits all. So people are starting to think, and I mean, honestly, I'm trying to drive that conversation too of like, look, remote work isn't a culture. You don't just say, hey, you're allowed to work from home, we've got a great culture. Like that doesn't mean anything. That's like, okay, I live in London, it's got a great culture. Like, no, it's the diversity of cultures and the circles that I'm connected to that makes it great. And so we really need to recognize and pay attention to how different virtual cultures can be. Some are very asynchronous and independent. Some are very synchronous and all about parties and games. And some are very synchronous and only logistical and tactical. And there's, different benefits programs, and people have retreats at different frequencies, and there's all of these X factors. So we're going to start to really see a cool conversation start about not just culture that has been a great conversation for the past decade, but specifically virtual and location relevant culture.
Oof. And it had me thinking, Laurel, as you're describing that, it's like self-awareness is the number one predictor of success for CEOs, right? Cornell did a study on that. And I always say, if it works for them, it probably works for all of us. So we should all be increasing our self-awareness. And I think this is an opportunity for self-awareness growth for organizations to be really honest about who you truly are as an organization. Stop saying you're innovative if you have 7 steps to get approval for something. Just own this, right? Own that we are very quality focused and that we, dot our I's and cross our T's and everything. That's actually a behavior that you can get behind. So I think this is an opportunity for us to really reflect, what have we been saying? Who are we really? We can say who we want to be and maybe aspirationally, but that's going to be incremental. So let's get realistic about who we are and share that with people.
Yeah. And our people are going to be able to call us out on those values. We all have those cultural posters that we have on the wall, like we're an empathetic company and we're a progressive company. And it's like, you might be able to say that. And we may have felt that way when we were in the office together, but this is a fork in the road that it's like, hey, are you truly empathetic and progressive or not? If you are calling everybody back into the office, not listening to their needs, and just resistant to change based on fear, are you truly embodying and activating your company culture values? Maybe not.
Yes. Because look, I've been inside companies who might have a really cool office space and have a ton of perks, but it's full of assholes. Yeah. Right. So, it's like we might have fooled them for a while when we were in-house because this like surroundings kind of distracted us of the, ooh, squirrel. But now that that's stripped away, we're really getting back to like what we really are, which I appreciate.
Yeah. And when we're in that digital space, we don't have the factors of time and space to hide behind when we're thinking about unity. When we're in an office, we think, well, of course we're unified. We're spending all of this time together. So yeah, we're a great team. But when time and space are taken away as factors and we're just left as a team who share ideas and share goals and share communication, that's where it really makes or breaks a lot of teams. And so, yeah, we see a big discrepancy in teams that are like, remote work's the best thing that has ever happened to us, and others that are saying we can't get any work done. And it's like, well, you're not unified in the factors that count.
Yeah, I do feel like, outcome for me, culture is the outcome of our daily habits and behaviors. So if we're feeling like that, this like pull and this ickiness and how work is getting done right now, then we have some work to do. Good indicator.
Yeah.
Laurel, give me some advice, because one of the things that I hear from, and again, every industry comes with its own uniqueness. And, obviously there's industries who can't even be remote, right? Manufacturing and some other things, medical. But I'm hearing some about the monitoring that's going on. And a lot of this big brother, like, well, I have to check. How am I going to know that they get their work done? A client said to me this week in a one-on-one, and I said, how are you going to know that they get their work done? Because they get the work done, right? They're giving you the plans for the client and they're getting their work done, right? Isn't that how you know they're getting their work done before?
Yeah.
There's no need to input this like sort of monitoring software, but give me your expertise here, because I might be off base.
Yeah. So this is a lesson that I learned as well. At first I was in the exact same position as you, that I was like, oh, that's so unethical. And yes, it should only be results-based. And that's just ridiculous. An invasion of privacy. However, I did have to swallow a piece of humble pie at one point when somebody who was a really large organization, actually it's Broadpath Healthcare Solutions, who said, oh yeah, we monitor all of our employees because that's what enables us to allow our workers to work from home, because we can prove visually HIPAA compliance. Okay. And that's where my mind absolutely exploded. That was probably 5 years ago. And since then, I've been very determined to be much, much more neutral and unbiased in my opinions as I'm working with clients to identify, is this a necessity for your team? Does this help your team or does it hinder your team? And sometimes it's on one side of the fence and sometimes it's on the other. We just don't know. So it depends on a lot of factors. Compliance is a really, really big one. So if you are assuming liability for workers' compensation and you need to prove that your workers are in a safe and non-hazardous work environment, that is one way that you can do that. There's also inspections that you can conduct and things like that. So yeah, there is, especially also if your operational processes are based on time, and that's like the core of all of your financial systems is hourly, then yeah, you probably need to be tracking time for your employees just for the sake of financial calculations and metrics. Yeah. So yes, there is a time and a place for those systems to be activated. However, if the purpose is not operational or legal, if the purpose is only based on a lack of trust and a need for visual supervision, that's when it's a problem. And so that's when we work on alternative methods, specifically implementing the results-based tracking and really identifying performance expectations based on objectives and key results and key performance indicators, and giving them the opportunity to report and track productivity in a different way, in a tool-based way that still gives them that visual signal of this person is more productive than this person, but just in a different way rather than watching them sit at their desk. Because we all know, you know, people put paperweights on the keyboards. You have had them, I know, because I have had them. We've all had days where we go to the office, we look really productive sitting at the desk, and we're not getting a thing done. So yeah, we all know that visual supervision of productivity is not the most accurate way. So again, this is where we remind ourselves remote work is just work. So we know that visual supervision is not the most accurate way. Let's get a new system in place, regardless of if they're in a cubicle or in a home office or a mobile office or wherever.
Oh, I think it's great, Laurel. And when we look at the results, I mean, for example, if you're a project-based company that is moving things forward for a client, but you're not using project management software, and you're instead putting your emphasis on monitoring emails and how active people are on their computer, like just reverse that. I mean, if what we're carrying is off as handoffs, right? Like I have a part of the project, I'm handing it off to Laurel. We should be using a software that enables that versus watching what we're doing all day. Let's look at the results. Let's build a structure that people can play really well and effectively in versus making them feel like they aren't trusted.
And when we do that, it unlocks so many opportunities, especially for neurodiversity. We've seen incredible case studies of companies that are really opening the door for work at your own pace. So we're not going to be paying attention to time as much, to allow people to work faster when they need to, slower when they need to. The use of asynchronous communication is great for personality-based traits like introversion and extroversion, people that don't feel as confident talking and thinking spontaneously. They need time to process, like all of those different aspects of diversity and inclusion that are more broad and than the traditional conversations about race and gender and sexual orientation that we think about. Like there's so many other layers to this that it can help influence as well. So yeah, it's fascinating and I love it so much.
I know, me too. Yeah, this. I wanted to ask you, Laura, about tools. Right? Because I mentioned project management software. You talked about asynchronous and leveraging that. Do you have some favorite tools or suggestions that would say like, maybe these are some of the things that you could consider that would make things easier or more effective?
That's a really great question, and I'm happy to answer it, but I want to first give the disclaimer that one of the benefits of being this old veteran of remote work is that we have been, not we, I should say I have been working remotely now for 15 years, like we talked about before. And back in that day, think about it, 15 years ago, we didn't have video calls, we didn't have cloud documents, we didn't have anything. We had email and phone call. That's it.
Laurel, you probably still had call waiting on a landline, right? Like, I don't know.
I totally did. Caller ID, man. I was even progressive because I didn't have a landline for my second job. But yeah, I mean, this is 15 years ago feels like 1,000 years ago in terms of technology. So way back in the day, we were able to work just as efficiently as we do now, even without the tools. So it is much, much, much more based on that communication, that trust, that asynchronous collaboration. It's much more based on that. I shouldn't say it, I should say the success of your team as in a distributed work environment is much more based on that trust, culture, and communication than it is on the tools that you're using. Now, that being said, yeah, has life gotten a lot easier with the technological developments that we've had in the past 15 years? Absolutely. Like, it's so great. So tools, I would say one that I use constantly is Loom. And that is what enables you to record video and record your screen and send it to somebody else. And that helps me so much because it enables me to have almost a synchronous conversation with somebody, that they get to see my body language, they get to see what I'm working on. It's just the same as them coming and sitting down with me in the conference room, and being like, okay, look at my computer here, but in a completely asynchronous way, so that I can send that to team members that are on the other side of the world or in a different meeting. I love anything that's enabling us to work more asynchronously. I love that. But then that's just, my personal favorite. At a core, what we need to be having for all of our teams is we need to make sure we have a synchronous communication channel, like video calls. We need to have an asynchronous communication channel. So those are things like Slack and Jira and Microsoft Teams, where you have threads of conversation. We need to have information security, and making sure that even if it's just a password protector, that will help. Something to do creative work together. So tools like Mural and Miro are great examples of that. Or just if you're using Zoom whiteboard or something, somewhere where you can like draw and have a more creative conversation. And then also file storage is great. So Google Drive obviously is very accessible to everybody, but things like Dropbox or Microsoft Word or whatever you want to use, but documents, files, consider this the file cabinet of your company. If you have all of those tools together and then enhance them with things like health and wellness, so making sure that everybody's taking the breaks that they need to, that they're working in an ergonomic setup, that they have psychological barriers set for their work-life balance, that they can plug in and out of work healthfully. That is really what makes a complete digital infrastructure for us at Distribute.
Oh, I think it's, yes, so many good things there. In my mind, even because I've been a remote leader for a while, right? 5 years on my own now and leading my own team, but even internally, I worked in international companies. So yeah. I had people that we never got to meet in person. I still haven't met, right? And I led for years. So I'm being open to, I was Voodle, for example, rethinking a team innovation experience that is asynchronous. And what I love about that is that my team has found we are blowing each other's text messages up and things that we've tried to move to other apps that aren't dinging and alerting us, that we can go in our own time, right? Yep. So I'm an early bird, 4:30 a.m. There's people who are night owls. Let's check it. Let's collaborate when it works for us. And so I think this is meeting my preference for humanity, right? Meeting these individuals where they're at and giving them the tools that they can be successful.
Yeah, that's another one of those elements of diversity. Like, it's been statistically proven that people are genetically disposed to being those early birds and night owls, but society is all clustering everybody together into the same business hours and saying, okay, this is when you're going to be productive, and that's unrealistic. Yeah. So yeah, enabling people to say, like, do the type of work at your peak hours, and somebody else can do their type of work at their peak hours, just enables that our teams to really unlock their individual productivity, which then unlocks our collaborative productivity and quality of our results as well. It's so great.
I know, so much good there. I know we have to go soon, Laura, but I want to leave just with some quick targeted advice. So let's start with the company. There's a company listening to us. I'm a words of encouragement person. It's my love language, words of affirmation. So what can we pour into them to give them either some direction or encouragement?
Yeah, I think first of all, give yourself that self high five in the air to say, like, what we have done in the past year is phenomenal. So even when in the beginning of this interview, when we were talking about there's a long way to go, there's more work to go, let's not get discouraged by thinking that we haven't started. We have done an incredible job in terms of resilience and agility, not only on an individual level, but on an organizational level, as well as a global community and business world level. Like, there is so much innovation and development that has happened in the past year that we are where we are because of it. So let's just keep up the momentum, as opposed to saying, like, okay, now it's time to get started. Like, just keep going. You're doing great. You've already proved that you can adopt remote work. Now let's just optimize it. So first celebrate. And then next is just build the optimization process just by starting with that communication. Just build those habits of transparency, of humanity, of emotional vulnerability, of consistency and frequency. Just communicate in a different way and really connect your team members in a more human way as opposed to a more logistical way. And that's where you'll really start to see the results happening. And that will open up the opportunities for you to customize remote work for your organization and figure out what the solutions are that you need. So if you just start there, that's really what will open the door to the rest of the path of your success. And it will all come very easily and organically after that. So that's, I mean, as always, I swear this is going to be on my tombstone when I die, right? Like communicate. But yes, that's what all of the answers boil down to, is just in remote work, over communication is just communication.
It is. That's spot on. And I think this leads me to my next group, which is the leaders, which is, I'll say now more than ever, it's important that companies are equipping and enabling their leaders to be successful in this environment. And that might mean that we have some leaders step down who actually weren't really great people leaders before, which there are a high percentage of those. And we move people into roles where they can really be people focused versus player coaches who are really rewarded for playing versus coaching. So let's give some tactical tip or something to the leader who says like, all right, they can't change the ecosystem overnight, but they're one person. What can they do to make progress in this area?
I think the big myth that we need to bust is finding that fine line of, hearing me say remote work is just work, and then also hearing me say like everything's changing and we need to do things differently. Like both are true, ironically. And so what we need to do is just acknowledge as leaders that remote work is easy. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we do need to acknowledge that it's different, and different enough that we do need specific training and support. So take the time to open your mind to say, all right, we're going to need to make some changes. Maybe we need to have a remote work policy, or we start a digital handbook. I definitely recommend at the very minimum some leadership training and self-management training for all of the workforces, because we are now independent at a higher level than we ever have been. So we need to understand how to take care of ourselves better, how to set those boundaries, how to prioritize our own tasks, how to self-report our productivity and raise our hand when we have a question. We need to be more effective self-managers. So for every single member of your company, I don't care if they were the janitor, everybody needs to understand what their new role in this ecosystem is. So getting some basic training for that, and then also some leadership training so those managers really understand what is the difference in my role between that time in the office when I could walk around the floor and see people at their cubicles and just do those drive-bys of, hey, how are you doing? Like, how does my role change now? Because if you don't address that elephant in the room, it causes a lot of managers, especially those new team managers, to have a loss of control and to feel very insecure in their job security, that they think, well, am I obsolete now that people are self-managers, or what am I supposed to be doing? What is my job? So really addressing that and supporting them in the transition is essential. Management buy-in is the #1 barrier to success of remote work sustainability. So paying attention to that demographic is very, very wise.
Yeah. And I know a lot of the leaders are individual contributors, right? They're having to think about their team and their own career. So I think that was great advice. Is your advice for the individual employee that much different?
Take ownership for the individual employee. Take ownership of this. What we see so often as consultants is a battle between the employee and the employer. And so the employee is waiting for the employer to roll out the remote work policy and offer to pay for the internet and to send them an ergonomic chair and to say, we're going to adjust our meeting schedule and blah, 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 blah. Like, they're waiting for that. And then the employer is saying, well, we're waiting for you to tell us what's wrong and what are the pain points that you need. And there's just this impasse because both parties are waiting for the other one to take responsibility. We need to recognize that it's going to take both parties stepping up and taking ownership in order to facilitate this change at the scale and rate that we need it to be facilitated. So we need to make sure that both of them are raising their hand, taking ownership of their success and saying, okay, how can I help you? And how can you help me? And how can we work together to make this change as quick and easy and painless as possible?
I think you nailed it, Laurel. One of the most asked for keynotes or workshops from me is this. It's got a long title, but it's owning your ideas and moving your career forward without breaking too much China.
Yeah.
And I say too much because you're going to break China if you're doing this. But I talk about the importance of the ecosystem, providing the environment that we can thrive as individuals, but the individual needs to take much more ownership and stop waiting for your career or your permission to be handed to you on a golden platter. It's not going to happen. So I'm hearing that this is obviously a community effort to really make this happen. And as always, guys, that is how companies achieve together. So
absolutely.
Such wise words today, Laurel, and so much wisdom that we can borrow from the best here. Where can we get connected to you more?
LinkedIn is a great place to start. I'm the only Laurel Farrer, and so that's a pretty easy to find me. And I love connecting with people and answering questions. I'm an advocate first and a consultant second. I've been answering questions for all of these years. So I love meeting new people and helping them and their organizations really understand what impacts this can have on their future. So please reach out to me. I'm a human being. I'm not just a character or just a voice. So yeah, please, LinkedIn messages all day long. I'm totally here for it. But you can also reach out to the other experts on our team at Distribute, just at our website, which is distributeconsulting.com.
Oh, well, listen, I strongly recommend people connect with you because you're one of my top culture crushes, Laurel. I think you're great. Thank you for all you're doing for humanity in our work and our workplaces.
Likewise. Thank you so much for opening the door and making the space for this conversation, Anna. It's so important. So I appreciate your time and attention.
Yes, of course. I'm sending everybody peace and progress as they get to work and start borrowing from the best.